Hey guys, I thought I'd show you a little bit about soloing and legato and how I, use it and everything. I've got this little backing track here that's an old Satch track, and it sounds something like this. Okay, so basically what we have there is more or less like an E-Lydian sort of groove. So we don't need to overcomplicate that. E-Lydian just means it's the fourth step. Lydian is the fourth step of the major scale. Okay, so E happens to be the fourth step of the B major scale. So you just need to know your major scale pattern and set it up to be in the key of B major, and then know your E's, and you're in good shape if you walk around. So I'll noodle a little bit for you to show you. Okay, so that was a little bit there. So there's different ideas. I'm moving all over the neck. Of course, this starts with knowing your patterns. So for me, I number the patterns based on the pentatonic. So like the most common like minor pentatonic box number 1 shape lives right there. So if you were to take a look at the B major scale, let's say, the box shape that lives there is, it's the one that, is like 1-3-4, 1-3-4 fingering wise, okay? A lot of people think of, B major as here because that's the lowest one you can do in the caged, the standard chord shapes. I think it's kind of silly to bog yourself down with renumbering the boxes based on the mode. Because remember, all 7 notes of the B major scale can be found in every box, okay? So it's better to just know that, and I'm thinking like, there's an E there and an E there. So you're sort of hearing this sort of thing happening. So that's kind of the 4th step of the scale to the 5th. So I can sit here and go like, now, of course, any of the notes that are in the chords are going to be strong notes in the scale, but it's good at first just to restrict yourself a little bit so that it's not as complicated. So basically, if you start on an E anywhere in that B major scale, and then you know your 7 notes and your pattern and your shapes, and you move around, and then try to end on a strong tone, like an E, you'll be fine. Now, of course, an E major chord has a G sharp and a B. Those will be strong too. And what particularly makes the Lydian mode sound different is that the B major scale contains the notes of the E major chord, but it has different notes that are different than, say, the E major scale. And so the one that's really different that you're going to hear a lot, you're hearing the A sharp there. And so that's really a different kind of thing. That would be the 11th, called the sharp 11 in an E major 7 chord. Okay, you don't have to know any of that, but anyway, I don't have to overthink the chord tones that way. So I'm basically hearing, and so I might be thinking, okay, so anyway, I'm hearing melodies within the scale, and then I'm thinking of phrasings. So let's say if I did the, okay, so I had a background as a clarinet player for a few years, and I listened to a lot of like jazz musicians, like horn players, Dixieland jazz stuff, going back to being a little kid. So I think I was subconsciously influenced by horn phrasing. So for those of you that don't know, on an instrument that you use your breath with, you create a tack, like when we pluck with a pick or our fingers, by tonguing the notes. So on a saxophone or a clarinet, you tongue the reed. So you go, ta, 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 ta. So if I was going da 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 da, that'd be like ta 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 ta, okay? But if I'm going like this, ta, okay? So I'm thinking about that. So I approach legato rather than just I'm not going to pick any notes as a trick, or I'm going to pick every time I start a string, okay, or triplets or something. I approach it as phrasing. So if I'm going, So I'm thinking da 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 da. So the da 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 in my mind is the attack. But look at all the ways you could do that. You could go, but that's very guitaristic. I found that if you do that note as a slide, it's a little more liquidy. It sounds a little bit more like a horn phrasing, like. And you can apply that to any gap or any shape in the scale. You know, so if I did like this shape here, I could be, or what if I went from here to there? Right? So if you think about it, sort of like phrasing is the punctuation in a sentence. So let's say if I put a comma in a particular place, but I swapped out the words, like I like dogs and fish and birds. So if I said I like motorcycles and planes and cars. Okay, so the phrasing stayed the same, the punctuation, but I changed out the words, so the notes are kind of like the words. The phrasing is the basic structure of when did I pick rhythmically and when did I do a particular sort of technique. Okay, now if I took that, I could swing that. So now that's like a pure legato thing. I picked just the first phrase. You can kind of see it in my hand here. And what this is doing, we'll get into that, but this gives me possibilities to come back and like hybrid pick a note so that it's not an obvious pick stroke. Okay, so like that. Cool. So there's all sorts of different phrasing you can do. Now, I used to also practice scales. So to me, this is vertical thinking. Most guitar literature refers to that as horizontal. But I also have a background as a piano player. Started playing at the age of 6. So to me, a guitar string is just a small piano keyboard. So if you basically, you know, for those of you that don't know, if you took the black keys on a piano and you were able to like melt them down so they were level with all the white keys, you know, that's what a guitar is. Every fret is a key. Okay, so I sort of visualize like, well, if I could just slide up and down and play a scale that way, that helps you visualize that. I was also really big into the band Sister Hazel out of Florida. They kind of blew up big when I was first starting high school, and the guitarist plays does slide work a lot like Duane Allman, Ryan Newell. And Ryan's a really melodic player. And so I didn't know how to play slide yet, but I was trying to mimic the sliding. So I hadn't heard of guys like Steve Vai yet that do a lot of that. So actually I probably picked that up from listening to Sister Hazel solos and stuff. So slide players do a lot of this. It's a very Duane Allman thing. So if you were taking that and combining the scale shapes, like, and then, that's a very un-guitaristic sounding thing. It's closer to what a horn player or a vocalist could do because there's no limitations in jumping around the instrument. And that's something that drove me nuts when I was first messing with guitar improvising, is that the guitar tends to want to force you to play in a chunk of the neck, which is why you have a lot of box sounding players, which is totally cool for certain things, right? If I wanted to go, that kind of lick, you know, that's a very traditional blues soul. It's sort of like the Journey Lights solo, or so, you know, that's a valid thing stylistically, but a lot of guitar players don't do that as a stylistic reason. They do that because they're allowing the instrument to impose playing limitations on them, or essentially they're letting the difficulty of the mechanics of the instrument force them into how they're going to play stylistically, rather than going, here's how I would like the instrument to sound, and then doing the work to figure out how you're going to do that. So, so before I had any kind of speed, I would, you know, practice working on that sort of stuff. So, you know, now that's a 4-note per string scale idea, okay? But you know, you don't have to stretch to do that. You could just put a slide somewhere. So the typical Satriani thing would be that kind of thing. So it's the big 3-note per string stretch. But you know, let's say if you can't do that, or it's not a comfortable thing for you, or what if you play like that, like blues rock style? I could still apply that pattern Or I could take this shape and start with the pinky. And I do that a lot where I whip into like the next note on the next string. So I'm playing that note over here. See what I'm thinking? Anyway, these are just some basic ideas, you know, just kind of mess around with them. Now, if you want to know a little bit about like some of the technique, people ask me a lot, you know, like, why do you hold the guitar so high? Well, so the thing is, if I held the guitar really low, for me, it's very uncomfortable to try to get my hand around. So, you know, I've sort of got large hands, but my fingers are sort of, you know, maybe slightly longer than average, but not big, and my pinky's kind of short. So if I were to try to, you know, you could reach the note here, which is fine if you're picking it, but if I have to hammer it, this is a really compromised position, and I would have to turn my wrist in a lot to do this. So getting it in more of a classical guitar position always worked for me, and it allows me to basically operate more like a piano player. You'll kind of see this with guys like Holdsworth. So to get that particular sort of even sound, like I'll kind of show you, if I were to be more slanty position here, like you can do it, but my pinky feels kind of stretched out, and I'm sort of hitting more on the pad of my finger, and I'm kind of rubbing off the string rather than plucking it. Okay, but if I'm more in this, say even that, if I'm more in this position, where I can come parallel position, if you'll notice, the hammers and pulls almost sound the same. Whoops. You know, and so you get this even piano-like sound, and that's because I can come straight down on the fingertip. I'm not having to like kind of aim my finger, it's just there, and I can drop straight down in like a little machine, you know, and so you get more uniform sound there. So that gives me access to that, and also like monster kind of stretch things. So like if I wanted to, you know, if I wanted to do a, you know, I'm gonna find that difficult to do if I were really low, you know, like that, and having to stretch. I personally, for me, I lose about a fret's worth of stretch, and even on the stuff that's like 5 frets, now feels like I have to really stretch like 6 frets to get 5 frets worth of stretch. Whereas here, you know, I can just kind of fall into it. So if I were doing, now I'll just show you, if I do this lower, look what happens to my hand. See, I'm having to kind of, okay? And the other thing to think about too is, you know, I play standing up a lot of times, and when you're sitting, you can do things where you could drop your shoulder to essentially get your wrist, basically the guitar higher and your wrist lower. If you're standing, if you drop your shoulder, generally what will happen is the guitar drops, you know, so I'm generally always playing in a classical guitar position, and that allows me to just play, you know, say like 5 frets doesn't look like much now, you know. Anyway, guys, hope that give you some ideas. If you like that kind of stuff, you know, let me know, and maybe I can do more of this kind of stuff. I also teach. I teach this stuff to my students all the time. The quarantine has given us opportunities to, you know, like I'm having to teach virtually right now over Zoom lessons. So, you know, I'd never considered that, and I'm thinking about doing that now. So if any of you guys have interest in doing that, if you were people who might have been interested in studying with me, but I wasn't doing that, or you're students that are, you know, not in my area, you know, I would like to maybe entertain working with you guys. So just let me know. Thanks a lot, guys. Be safe.